Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Monero and its valuation against USD and against Bitcoin. So if you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So Monero is one of these coins that we published a video on it in August and in September, identifying this reaccumulation phase against Bitcoin, right? This was, we said this is a great reaccumulation phase against Bitcoin, and it looks really similar to the ADA accumulation phase against Bitcoin that we experienced, that we identified earlier, or last year when we identified it last year. So I said, this looks like a pretty good reaccumulation phase, and it appears in the short term it has worked out rather well, and the valuation of Monero against Bitcoin has been moving up. Now, the question, of course, is how much longer can something like this be sustained? Well, I can tell you that the main premise of this move has always hinged on the fact that Bitcoin will hold the 20-week moving average. If we look at the 20-week moving average, and actually this is the crossover of the 20-week and the 21 EMA, but if you look at it, you can see that for the time being, Bitcoin is actually holding it quite well. So right now, the 20-week moving average is at around 10,316, and you can see the price of Bitcoin has recently rallied back up to around 10,880. So in the short term, Bitcoin seems to be doing quite well. Now, the reason why Monero has continued, or I should say, one of the key things about Monero that sets it apart from a lot of other altcoins right now is every time that Bitcoin retests the 20-week moving average, a lot of altcoins get hammered against USD and against Bitcoin. On the other hand, Monero does not. Okay, Monero does not seem to be doing that. What it does do, when Bitcoin retests the 20-week, it does lose some value, but then it's able to pretty quickly pick right back up where it left off and continue moving up. So despite the fact that you might see it oscillate significantly in USD, in its Bitcoin valuation, it is actually pretty much been going parabolic over the last several weeks. If we were to take a measured move from, say, the beginning of June to now, it's up approximately 50% against Bitcoin. That is actually pretty significant. If you think about it, it's gone up 50% against Bitcoin during this time. And despite the fact that Bitcoin has been testing the 20-week moving average for the last 6 weeks or so, if you look at the last 6 weeks of Monero, so if we start here and we go back 6 weeks, you can see that Monero week over week has basically been gaining value against Bitcoin. There was one red candle, but more or less it's been gaining value against Bitcoin. So on any given day, of course, the valuation can fluctuate. That's just natural volatility. But the trend, the macro trend that we identified as, this was our final capitulation, this was the reaccumulation regime, and then this is our move back out, this has not changed, okay? So what I would anticipate is if Bitcoin continues this trend of holding the 20-week moving average and not testing it, or going below it, I should say, then I do anticipate in the short term that Monero would continue to do fairly well against Bitcoin. I don't know if it'll quite make it back up to this regime up here. If it does, we're talking about another 30% move against Bitcoin over the next few weeks. Okay. Alternatively, if Bitcoin does not hold the 20-week moving average, then we can essentially forget about this idea, and what's more likely to happen would be to come back in this regime. Now, some of you may be wondering, why Monero? Like, what makes Monero special? Why is it, there's a lot of other coins out there that tend to bleed against Bitcoin during successive weekly tests of the 20-week moving average. We've covered a lot on the channel. Cardano is one that tends to bleed against it. Ethereum is one that tends to bleed against it. Link is another coin tends to bleed against it whenever Bitcoin continues to retest the 20-week moving average. But we identified months ago that this would be more likely Monero's time to shine. Okay, one of the reasons we said this was because if you look at the last market cycle, the major move that Monero made against Bitcoin actually occurred in June of 2016. From this time, it actually spiked around 1,400%. Okay, now what makes this important? Well, if you look at the chart of Bitcoin and go back to May of 2016, so all the way back over here, Bitcoin was actually hugging the 20-week for a while during this period of time, leading up to this move. So you go back to right here, you can see that this was the middle part of May. During this period, Bitcoin was hugging the 20-week moving average, and then it spiked itself. And even during that spike by Bitcoin, Monero was spiking much more because it was gaining value on Bitcoin over the next 2 to 3 months. And during that time, if we zoom back in here, during May of 2016, so this would be the middle part, you can see that over the next few weeks, Bitcoin went up 72%. Until the end of July, it was still up 42%. Even though Bitcoin did really well, Monero was gaining like crazy on Bitcoin during this time period. The reason why this is important is because a lot of coins tend to move at other times during the market cycle. For instance, Ethereum is one that tends to move sooner, right? When Bitcoin was first above the 20-week moving average, it tended to make a move approximately 100 days after Bitcoin was above it. So if you go back and you look at when Bitcoin got above the 20-week moving average, back over, so this was in October of 2015. If we take a measured move from October of 2015 to when Bitcoin first started holding the 20-week moving average, it was approximately 91 days. And then if you look at the Ethereum chart during that same time period, so let's go all the way back over. So in October of 2015 is when Bitcoin got above its 20-week. There was a short-term spike in the valuation of Ethereum against Bitcoin, but the major move happened here in January when Bitcoin got to its 20-week moving average, and it spiked. At this point, it spiked approximately 1,800%. But then in May, after Ethereum had already made this move, the Ethereum Bitcoin ratio was actually bleeding for the foreseeable future. But Monero against Bitcoin was actually moving up during this time. So the reason we said that this is likely a key accumulation range for Monero is because it really was not breaking out against Bitcoin, even though Ethereum was, which was the exact same trend that happened the last time during the market cycle where we got above the 20-week and then held it as support. So the same trend was occurring. I've often contended that historical patterns or historical moves do not necessarily predict the future, but at least I can use these trends to inform my decisions. And looks like yet again this has worked out pretty well, because we can see that this was a fairly well-defined accumulation region for Monero, and even as late as September 14th, we were still in this accumulation phase, which, by the way, was less than a month ago. This was still after many other coins had already made incredible moves against Bitcoin, but we said, you know what? Monero had a delayed reaction in the last market cycle against Bitcoin, and maybe it'll have a delayed one again. Now, I contend that this market cycle will be longer than the last one. If you go and look at, say, the BLX, which is what I typically like to look at for long-term Bitcoin moves, and if we put on here the trusty logarithmic regression band, you'll know that I don't think that Bitcoin's going to get to its prior all-time high for another 16 months and probably won't reach a new paradigm shift of, say, near 6 figures until sometime in, say, 2023 or so, maybe even a little bit later, but probably sometime around 2023. So with this in mind, I don't expect the market cycle to look exactly the same. Things are going to be more drawn out, but we also know that the ROIs will likely be less than the last market cycle. That's not necessarily something you need to be sad about. It's just information that you should be aware of so that you don't necessarily think that Monero has to pump from the bottom 1,400% against Bitcoin like it did during the last market cycle, which would be way up here, because I don't think that's going to happen in the short term. What's more likely to happen are shorter moves or smaller moves where we then come back down and retrace and wait for Bitcoin to basically go up this step function back to 20K. Right now we're between 10 and 12K. I think the next level will be around 14K. But for now, this is where we are, and this is what we have to work with. So the key thing here, right, is Bitcoin just continuing the trend of staying slightly ahead of the 20-week moving average, and I think Monero will continue to do well. And this is really saying something, because my contention for most other coins is that every time that Bitcoin retests the 20-week moving average, these other coins will likely continue to bleed against Bitcoin. In the last video on Monero, we showed that if you take into account historical data from 2015 for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, and Litecoin, the actual portfolio that maximizes your risk-adjusted returns incorporates 17% Monero and 0% Litecoin, 30-something percent Ethereum, and then the rest Bitcoin. But there is a percentage in there of Monero. So without even ignoring, if we ignore what maybe a projected return will be or projected volatility, and we just take into account historical volatility and historical returns since 2015, it showed us that having 17% Monero, when you only are considering those 4 coins, that the data from those 4 coins since 2015, 17% Monero actually maximized your Sharpe ratio or your risk-adjusted returns. Okay, so you wanted to be on the efficient frontier, and then the point on the efficient frontier, which maximizes your risk-adjusted returns, was 17% Monero of your portfolio. So one of the reasons is, as you can see, some of this positive volatility will actually help offset some negative volatility of other coins. You want to improve the covariance matrix between these, or at least improve the covariance matrix that you're working with, and having a coin that is moving up while other coins are either moving down or sideways is good, because you lower your overall negative volatility, which also is related to the Sortino ratio. So the Sortino ratio only takes into account negative volatility. The Sharpe ratio takes into account positive and negative. So the Sharpe ratio punishes positive volatility. The Sortino ratio only punishes negative volatility. The Sharpe ratio punishes both. So as far as Monero goes, I think this accumulation region down here that we identified has actually worked out quite well so far. If you look to see where the price currently is, you can see that we're basically right at this support regime that we were at when we came down back in 2019. So what I'm looking for over the next several weeks, assuming Bitcoin holds the 20-week moving average, doesn't even necessarily, even if it retests it, I think that there's a better chance. I think there's a fairly decent chance that the Monero ratio against Bitcoin continues to go up. Now, this is not financial advice. I could be wrong, of course. There's always a probability of being wrong. But I think that the general trend is more likely to be up in the short term rather than down. But at the end of the day, short-term moves in cryptocurrency are more or less a random walk. We generally want to look at the macro trend. So I mean, in the short term, it's possible that we even come back down and then go back up, right? Or maybe we go up and then come down and then go back up, or maybe we just go all the way up and then we come all the way back down, or maybe we go down and then we go back up. Right? I can't really tell you what's going to happen in the short term. My contention, though, is over the next several weeks, several months, that the Monero ratio against Bitcoin is more likely to trend up as long as Bitcoin stays above the 20-week moving average. This is just what the historical data suggests, and is what I'm using to inform my own decisions. So, taking a look at the USD valuation, it's not as interesting, in my opinion. If you look to see where we currently are, we're basically at the top of historically where we were back in 2019. So if you look in June of 2019, this was more or less our local top at the time, was around $120 or so, somewhere between $110 to $120. So it's possible this level is met with some resistance. However, I contend that there's still a decent chance that we come back through this and go back up a little bit. So we'll see what happens. Remember, I'm more so looking at the valuation of Monero against Bitcoin rather than the valuation of Monero against USD, because they are two completely different things. So if you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. Also, check out the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com if you want access to exclusive content such as weekly premium reports, weekly premium videos, a risk dashboard, which includes the Monero risk levels against USD, Bitcoin, and Ethereum, also the private Telegram alerts channel and the private Telegram chat room. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.